everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my weekly wrap-up of May 31st, 2015. I'm going to take a break from all the cooking I've been doing the past couple of days and tell you about what I read this week. The first thing that I finished this week was Stiff by Mary Roach. This is her book about human cadavers and what happens to our bodies when we donate them to science, or how we dispose of bodies, burial of various types, and alternative methods being proposed. I think this book does a really good job of giving you a taste, that's probably a bad word to use, of the various ways that human cadavers are used in scientific and medical research, but also I think she really conveys how important the use of real human cadavers is. There's so much that we just can't learn about our own bodies and about safety in particular, that you can't use an analog, you can't use a pig corpse to discover all this stuff. Sometimes you really have to use a human cadaver. And I think she talks a lot about the taboos around using dead bodies. Basically, there are these lines that people won't cross, but it's hard to convey what that line is. It's hard to articulate what that line is. And therefore, that gets in the way of a lot of research. I felt like I really did learn quite a bit of stuff from this book. I didn't know some of the realities of how human bodies are used in medical research. I was familiar with the idea of, having your body dissected in an anatomy lab and the respect in that process that they try to show a lot in medical school, but I wasn't aware of some of the other things she talks about. I would definitely recommend this particular book by Mary Roach. I think this and Packing for Mars are my favorite ones by her. The next book that I read was Prudence by Gail Carriger. This is the first book in her new Custard Protocol series, which is actually a duology, I think, so only one more book is going to be published. This takes place 20 years after her Parasol Protectorate series, and it follows the adventures of Prudence, who is Alexia Taraboti's daughter. It also has the twin children, Percy and Primrose, of Ivy Tunstall, who was Alexia's friend, and Keno Lafou, who is also the son of Madame Lafou. Prudence is sent to India by her adopted father, Lord Akaldama, who is a vampire, in order to find tea. It must be really, really fantastic tea. And on the way there, and then in India, Prudence and her friends have adventures and a lot of crazy stuff happens. I admit, I was a little bit disappointed by this. It lacked something. It lacked the charm or the heart or the emotion of the Parasol Protectorate books, especially of Soulless, and it wasn't as fun adventure-y as the Finishing School series, and I'm not sure why. It felt like it was missing a key ingredient to make everything work. It also felt like Carriger has been repeating her jokes one too many times. I felt like the female characters, Primrose and Prudence, their characterization relied way too much on these very repetitive jokes about tea for every situation and wearing the right clothes. It could have been my mood while reading this, but I seriously doubt it. I just don't think this hit the right notes. I hate saying that too because I really like Gail Carriger. The next thing that I finished was Seveneves by Neal Stephenson. Oh, I love this book. Seveneves is hard science fiction that explores a big idea. The premise of Seveneves is that the moon breaks apart and causes a catastrophic apocalypse, a rain of meteorites or bolides onto Earth, which is going to kill everybody. Humanity has 2 years warning this is going to happen, and they must launch a detailed space program to get as many people off the ground as possible and design ways to ensure the survival of the human species. I adored the level of technical details. I mean, you just get these paragraphs upon paragraphs explaining, how they design something, how they build it, how they put it into motion, and then how it actually works. And it's so cool. There are also some really great characters. The 8 women who become the bottleneck of the human species are really fantastic. There are characters that you love, like I loved Ivy, I loved Dinah, but then there are characters that you hate. If there is one person who deserves to be put out in a real, honest-to-God airlock, it's Julia. Can we just do that already? Come on. At the moment, I'm finding it really hard to be objective about this book. I gave this a 5-star rating because I adored it so much, but I can absolutely see why people wouldn't like parts of this book. The structure, the immense level of technical and scientific detail, and it doesn't have the best ending. I feel like it's a real Stephenson ending, and I was totally expecting it, so it was fine. I liked this book so much because it met my expectations. It was like my expectations were perfectly calibrated for this book. It was great. And even though the last third still left a lot of questions, I think, especially about the evolution of some things, it was still good, and I still enjoyed the last third. But I could have read a lot more of this book. The next book that I read was Sign of Chaos by Roger Zelazny, the 8th book in the Amber Chronicles and the 3rd book in the Merlin cycle. In this book, Merlin escapes from his Wonderland weird scenario from the end of the previous book and then embarks on a plan to storm the Keep of the Four Worlds and unmask the sorcerer who has been trying to attack him but not explaining why. I liked this book a lot more than I liked the previous Merlin book. I really haven't been enjoying the Merlin books as much as the Corwin ones. Strangely enough, I thought that Merlin, because he appeals to me more as a more modern, younger version of Corwin, would just make the story better. But I have become so frustrated with how naive Merlin is acting. You know, there's something to be said for the paranoia built into his family that he doesn't seem to be taking to heart. Somebody's really trying to kill him, and yet he just blindly seems to trust people who come his way, especially women, and he's always paying for it. He's always like going off on some like romantic adventure with a woman, and never for a moment thinking that once again, following the pattern of these stories, this might be somebody who wants to kill him or isn't who they say they are, and I was frustrated by that. However, in this book, I really felt like things were happening, even though Merlin as a character just made me kind of roll my eyes quite a bit. I felt like the story had more forward momentum, which is what the previous book lacked. He actually has a plan and tries to do something, and we have a pretty good cliffhanger ending with what happens. And I also really like the introduction of his brother Mandor from the Courts of Chaos. I love Mandor. I had totally forgotten about this character, but I just was having flashbacks to my 14-year-old self while reading this because, guys, I had a huge crush on Mandor. For some reason, when I was a kid, he is a badass Courts of Chaos sorcerer with his, like, 3 steel balls like floating around and like telekinetically, and he does spells with them. I like him, and his personality and his attitude is really like devil may care. I'm a sorcerer of the Courts of Chaos. I'm walking around in amber and I really shouldn't be here, but you know, hey, your aunt's hot. I was just like, oh god, needs more Mandor. So it was pretty good. It was definitely a step up from the previous Merlin book, and I am interested in reading the next 2 because I want more Mandor. The next book I read was really different from the other things I read this week. It was Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen, which is the story of a 17-year-old girl named Catherine Morland. She goes to Bath with her neighbors, the Allens, and while there she meets the Thorpes. She becomes friends with Isabella Thorpe, who shares her love of Gothic romance novels, and she meets Mr. Henry Tilney and his sister, Miss Tilney, and eventually is invited by their father, General Tilney, to visit their house, Northanger Abbey, where she becomes convinced that General Tilney has murdered his wife. This is one of the first novels that Jane Austen wrote, and I think that really shows. I'm not an expert in any way at dissecting Jane Austen or the themes or her writing or her evolution as a writer, but even I could tell this was one of her earlier works. It didn't feel as polished or well-developed thematically or character-wise as some of her later books, but it did have charm. I really liked Catherine. It could be easy to see her as a real country bumpkin, kind of stupid, silly girl, but I thought that she was really sweet and by nature forgiving and happy and cheerful. I felt there were a number of times in the story where Catherine's natural, cheerful resilience really helps her. It appeals to other characters in the story, but it helps her get through things. It makes her a really pleasant person to be around, and I liked that. So this was an enjoyable read, but I don't think it was the best Jane Austen novel, and it wasn't my favorite by any means. I think this is my least favorite Jane Austen novel, but it was still, like I said, enjoyable to read, and I really liked Catherine. Those are the things that I read this past week. I'm sorry if for some reason I'm a little bit incoherent about them or I don't explain why I liked or disliked things very well. I'm just having one of those mornings, unfortunately. But on to the things that I am currently reading. My audiobook right now is The Magician King by Grossman, the second book in his Magician series, which I really do want to finish soon. I couldn't get myself to read the physical copy when I had it from the library, but I have really been enjoying listening to this on audiobook. On my Kindle, I'm reading The Bullet Catcher's Daughter by Duncan, which I have kind of put on the back burner right now. I'm just not super enjoying it. I'm not in the right mood for it, so I'll come back to it in a little while. It's not a bad book. In fact, I think that the premise and the main character and what she's doing are very interesting, but it's just not jiving with my mood right now. The other book that I'm reading on my Kindle is The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. I'm reading this with Tara from Terabyte. This is a reread for her, but of course it's my first time reading it, and I'm really enjoying this book. It's really, really good. The other book that I'm reading right now is The Paper Magician by Charlie N. Holmberg, which is about a young woman named Sione Twill who graduates from a school for the magically inclined and has just begun her apprenticeship in paper folding magic, which I think is a really cool idea. The other book that I'm going to be picking up this week is Glamour and Glass by Mary Robinette Kowal. This is the second book in her Glamourist Histories series, which begins with Shades of Milk and Honey, which I thought the first book was okay. It was a little bit too derivative of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice for me, but I've gotten the impression that the later books in the series are much more Kowal's own invention, so I'm very interested in reading more by her. I'm going to be buddy reading this book with Annie from Bloom TV, which I am really looking forward to. That is everything for me this week. If you've read any of these books or if you want to, please comment down below and let me know your thoughts. I would love to hear from you guys. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again in my next video. Bye.